Hythloday. Yeah, well, I think you have a problem with me that's separate from mathematics. I think you think that I'm just like the smart-ass kid, or I sit in the back of the class making wisecracks, and you think, you know, but I'm getting A's, and oh, he thinks he's so smart, and he's not smart. Look, I think, I don't think I present myself. I'm not up here wearing a bow tie and shit, or I go out of my way to make my video before I comb my hair to go out into the world. I do not try to lend my, but then again, maybe that's the point. You don't like this smart-ass kid that, you know, tries to make it look easy. I work just as hard. I remember one time I was up, it was like 5th grade or something. No, let's see, no, it was 6th grade. I was up until like 11 o'clock doing my homework, and I had started it, you know, early, 4 or whatever. And the next day, I found out the teacher had made a mistake. I was the only kid that had done all the homework. And my mom had tried to get me to stop doing it. I'm like, no, I'm almost done, I'm almost done. And that would have felt stupid, and oh shoot, why did I do all that? Except for that I didn't have to do any homework like the next week and a half or something, because I'd done it all. So I work hard. Doesn't matter if I want to be more casual and offhand, and you go, hey, you shouldn't be so offhand. But then you choose the weirdest things to take a stand on. I mean, I'm making all these other points, and this is just a feature in it, and you really have to ask yourself, is this the kind of, you know, thing that he's relating to the point? Is there, you know, the grain of truth in the context to make it make sense? But you just want to go off on some technical thing, and then you get it like totally wrong. You'd think the answer to Zeno's paradox is that we define the road. Okay, we agree that his paradox is based on thinking that an infinite sum adds up to infinity, so that the time it'll take, you know, it takes half the time to cross the first half, and half of the half, and half of the half, and he's saying, oh, that'll all add up into infinity. A lot of his paradoxes are like that infinite number of points in the line that when you're throwing a spear in the line segment, so you can't ever get there. And that's a geometric series. He's saying it has an infinite result. We know it has a finite result. That particular one, right? We know the finite result. I say that solved that paradox. How, that's not debatable, right? We have an answer to that. It actually takes 1 unit of time to cross the road. And he didn't know that. We know that, so that's a solution to the confusion, right? Mathematics is involved, but also the word solution is just that, okay, we understand that if you... Now, how is induction involved in that? It's because what I do is I prove, well, if I split the road in half one time, case 1, k of 1, let's call that case, and add those two halves together, I'll get 1. And I can prove that then that's also true in the case of k2, where I split the halves into halves, because those halves also add up into the whole, which in that case, you know, is a half, and to the other half, you get 1. And then with induction, I say, look, I proved 1 leads to 2, and that'll lead to 3, and so on, and I get out to infinity. The fact that it's going to be 1, and that's like the source of your assumption it's going to add up to 1, is really just an inductive assumption that if I break something in half and add it together, that's going to be the whole again. And if I do that any number of times, it's going to reassemble into the whole every time. But tell me, so what about 1/3 plus 1/9 plus 1 81st and so on? What does that add up to? How do you just define that one to 7? We should really be talking about psychology, because this is something about me. You're one of these kind of people. I've run into them before, where I just rub them the wrong way. Just my mannerism and my think I'm somehow somethinging that they don't like, and then they go off on like, induction has nothing to do with infinite series. What? You know, we have induction, deduction, and reduction. Reduction, you break things down into their parts. Deduction, you make inferences between data points, right? And induction, you work beyond the data points, right? So infinity, the only one is to deal with infinity is where you go beyond the data points, since you always have finite data points. Use induction pretty much in general. And I'm not being loose in this, but I'm also not just talking about, I mean, I'm pretty sure that it was in real analysis that these points were made to me, and I realized that infinity, finally, why infinity is not a number, why you can't divide by infinity, why you use calculus to deal with infinity. It's because it comes down to infinite series. It really comes down to induction. Infinity is not a number because it's really this idea where you can always have another case. And the point is if the next case is predictable, then you can actually do reasoning about it. And in mathematics, it's a great example because unlike the real world, we make some assumptions so that, for example, induction is going to work, unlike, you know, who was it, Hume talked about, you know, in the real world we don't really know that laws of physics will be the same tomorrow. You know, in math you can assume that the rules work the same over time. So, I mean, your dispute is that you don't use induction with limits or infinite series. Or is it, then for a second you said specifically you don't get the number from induction. I'm not saying induction spits the number out. I'm saying induction is how you get a hold of the problem. And it is how you start to understand what the numbers are going to be. And I don't get how you don't realize limits are based on mathematical series which were comprehended through more technical understanding of induction. Well, what are we debating? See, I think you really want to debate my attitude. I mean, what would I have to gain trying to mislead people with the idea, because in my original video, I mean, the only idea I really presented would have to be, you know, that Zeno's paradox had a solution related to induction and geometric series. And that's not true. You don't see how induction is related in the splitting the road in half once, twice, infinitely. You don't see how we've solved. I mean, what are you disagreeing with? It seems like the way I present it. Now, the reason I got insulting with you is because you immediately, like, you do know I'm a third year blah, blah, blah student, so you were the one that was trying to argue by your own authority. And I've been through this with you before. You don't... I would appreciate if, when you got all rude and challenging, that it was on something of some interest. I don't consider Zeno's paradox or the role of induction in series as controversial, or it's interesting. It's interesting to learn it. But I would like you to talk to your professors. Why do we assume the limit is 1 in this case? Why do we ask them if induction and series underlie limits and thus calculus? I wish you would figure out what you really care about. And if it's the fact that I called the area of volume, then you're just going to bleat like that forever. Because that is because I believe an area is basically just a two-dimensional volume. I think the length of a line segment is basically a one-dimensional volume. just because we historically call those by different terms, I don't really see the difference. I consider it n-dimensionally. And you don't just start the n-dimensionality at like the fourth dimension and up. The fourth dimension and up, you just start using the third dimensional terms. Why not use them for everything? And it doesn't matter. It doesn't change my point that I'm stumbling. My point was that the velocity and acceleration and jerk and distance and these things are all related through the mathematics, and calculus is what glues that together. Is that not true? You don't see how cool that's a cool thing. I'm saying here's a cool thing about math and reality, and you disagree. It's not cool. I'm just drawing attention to that phenomena, and you think I'm trying to appear smart, but if I was trying to appear smart, I would use all the terms in the way that all the people that want to think other people think they're smart use the terms. But I don't. I'll just say volume under the curve, and I'll say it again. You know, I'll say the area inside the sphere. Well, no, probably not. That this doesn't feel right. You don't seem to get abstractions too much. You definitely don't get what I'm saying is important. I'm not saying it's important whether we call that the area under the curve or the volume. I mean, obviously it is the area. Technically we use the word area for two-dimensional volume. You know, I don't see this stuff as just conventions. You know, one way in school that I made things easier for me is always to try to understand why I'm doing something. I don't just remember a bunch of rules. And if someone says we just assume this, at this point I'm like, well, why? Why did we assume that? And the reason is because then if you get the principles of something, when you get confused because it's getting complicated and you're always reading another section, but if you understand the principles, they start to fit together. If you're just remembering a bunch of rules of stuff you're supposed to do, you get a huge, unhandleable list. But if you remember the principles, then when you get confused about all these things you're supposed to do, you can re-remember and generate them because you know why, right? So it's a way to remember that list by seeing the patterns in the list, right? So there are reasons that underlie assumptions. And that's the whole point. Everybody's always trying to tell me, well, no, here's an assumption where we just define it, we start at that. It's like, no, if you keep advancing your study, there's always a reason. And that's the whole point of the videos that I've been making recently, is that ultimately the first reason, prima causa of materialism, is that we perceive. And then we're doing information processing. We're interpreting our perceptions as information with the help of memory. And then we're doing information processing. And depending which kind of information we're kind of trying to process and for what reason, we have every other form of thinking, every other subject. I'm not trying to convince you that I'm anything at all like that. I don't know where you get that. I'm not trying to make you a fan of me. I'm not trying to convey anything other than my opinions. And yet, granted, I have solid ones, but you take some little tangent. My video wasn't all about Zeno's paradox or anything, or induction is exactly as I talk about dozens of little things like that that you could have picked off. You just find one little thing and go, oh, that doesn't sound quite right. You think I was trying to sound exactly quite right in just one of a series of things talking about a bigger picture? No. And then, but of all the ones you choose, of all of the phrases I don't choose carefully because I'm not prepared for that, except for that, oh, hey, I think I'll make a video on this subject. I was kind of thinking these things. And then I just do it. And of all the things loosely said, which you should just say, hey, well, to be specific, this is this other way. You choose something like, is induction a part of mathematical induction, a part of solving the riddle of infinite series from the perspective of Zeno didn't have that solution. Zeno thought the infinite series would add up to infinity, and we have a solution and that's induction is related to that. And that's what you're going to, that's like, out of all the things I said, that's the most technically defensible, because induction is how you deal with infinity in general. Mathematical induction for mathematical infinities, and generally induction, which leads to, in philosophy, the problem of induction, which is that, strictly speaking, with this element of time, you can't induce over time necessarily. The mathematical induction works so well because it doesn't really matter what time it is. But in physical induction, it's like, how are you going to prove the sun's going to come up tomorrow, even though you're going to count on it? You know, because the sun's going to blow up eventually or whatever. It doesn't have the advantage of timelessness. So you have induction as basically the way you go beyond data points, beyond a finite set of data points. Is really, tell me what other way you get to infinity, and making arguments about infinity in infinite cases and infinite amounts of data point, when you have a finite amount of data. What other thing besides induction? Right? It's not deduction or reduction, or so what is it? What kind of analysis can you do that? Because I believe it's induction that we use to generalize from our data set outside the data set. Okay? And if you really just want to talk about, you don't like my attitude, then talk about that. Let's just talk about my attitude, and I'll talk about why you're welcome not to like my attitude. But nothing about the way you behave improves my attitude. You give me a bad attitude. Yes, you make me feel more arrogant, because I just don't want to take time to bullshit about you. Show me the ramifications. Go back to the topic of my video and say how the topic of my video is undermined by the fact that I think, erroneously according to you, that there's a relationship between Zeno's paradox, the solution of Zeno's paradox, infinite series, and induction. How does me believing that, which is true, I still believe it, undermine the point in the video? Or do you know what the point of the video was? It was not a big long video just on that one subject. So show me how that's related, right? Okay, and if you just like, I want to talk about mathematical induction, then just don't act like it's a reply, like you're bitching at me because I'm the wrong kind of person for you, and just make a video on that. But if you want to talk about me and my attitude, let's just focus on that. Okay, if you want to talk about the induction stuff, then make a relationship between the error you think I made and the point I was making in that video, and how my error undermines my point. I mean, it's one or the other. You just get them all mixed up, like I have some vested thing in seeming real together. Obviously I don't. I don't do anything to seem real together, so that can't be it. Oh, I know what it is. You think it's a problem that someone that isn't trying to seem all together and make sure he says area instead of volume, he shouldn't claim to know anything at all. No, you should just judge for yourself, and sadly, in your case, that's a desperate situation. You don't seem too good at getting abstractions. So you think it's a significant thing to misspeak area for volume. But to me, it's obvious that those conceptually, and in the context especially that I was talking about, that bears nothing on the point that I was saying, any more than if I'd used the French words, or it doesn't, or if I'd pointed to it and used no words, it goes, look, he's struggling. No, the point about the relationship between velocity, acceleration, and distance, that's just true, right? See, so you think something is important that's to me insignificant. Shows you're struggling. Well, I mean, what do you mean? It's not struggling because it doesn't bear on the point. I just don't waste extra energy on things that don't bear on the point. And then still you're going to come in. I mean, this is just ludicrous. This isn't, induction is the only, it's a word for going beyond your data points. If you don't realize that induction is related to all treatment of infinity, then I don't want to convince you of that. I don't want to convince anybody else of that. Everybody, please feel free to believe Hythloday. I'm keeping my opinion. I'm not going to change my opinion on it. And you guys can just all go to school like Hythloday and I did for math. Finish your math degree, or you can finish a philosophy degree, or choose your own third path.